Welcome to my channel. Subscribe to the channel and listen to my stories every day. Dinner was on the table, the usual affair of roast chicken and vegetables, with Jenna, my wife of 14 years, occasionally glancing at her phone, oblivious to my efforts in the kitchen. Carrie, our 13-year-old daughter, sat across from me, engrossed in her doodles on the edge of a napkin. The hum of family life carried on, but lately, something had shifted. Jenna's presence felt fragmented, like she was there in body but not in spirit. I had learned to chalk it up to stress. She had mentioned work troubles, more meetings, difficult colleagues, and the occasional late night. It sounded plausible, but deep down, there was a gnawing feeling I couldn't shake. That evening, it would all begin to make sense. After dinner, Carrie disappeared into her room with her sketchbook, and Jenna retreated to the bedroom, citing exhaustion. I was clearing the plates when Carrie popped back in, a small envelope in hand. "Here, Dad. Mom said this was from Aunt Lisa." She grinned before darting back to her room. Lisa, Jenna's older sister, wasn't one for casual notes or impromptu messages. Curious, I dried my hands and tore open the envelope. Inside was a slip of paper with Lisa's handwriting, hurried but clear: "Call me. It's urgent. Jenna isn't who you think she is." I stared at the note, my mind swirling. What did Lisa mean? Was this some misunderstanding, a prank even? The words felt heavy, almost ominous, and my stomach churned as I folded the note and tucked it into my pocket. The next morning, while Jenna took Carrie to school, I dialed Lisa's number. It rang twice before she answered, her voice steady but tight. "I was wondering when you'd call." "What's this about?" I asked, keeping my tone even. There was a pause. Then, she dropped the bombshell. "Jenna's been cheating on you." The words hit me like a freight train. My grip on the phone tightened as I leaned against the counter for support. What are you talking about?" "It's been going on for years, Kurt," Lisa said, her voice softening. I didn't want to believe it at first, but I've seen the proof. My thoughts raced. Proof? Years? My throat tightened as Lisa continued, her words heavy with guilt. "She's been seeing George. George. My best friend. My best man. The guy who had been by my side for decades." The very idea was absurd, impossible. But as Lisa laid out the details, the secretive texts, the suspicious trips, the moments she had personally observed, it became harder to deny. "I couldn't stay silent anymore," Lisa concluded. "You need to know the truth." Thank you," I stammered, my voice barely audible. "I need time to process this." Lisa's voice softened further. "Kurt, I'm here for you. But if you're going to confront her, you need proof. Let me help." I hung up, my thoughts in disarray. Proof. Confrontation. The betrayal felt like a sharp blade twisting in my chest, but Lisa was right. Accusations without evidence would lead nowhere, especially with someone as sharp and stubborn as Jenna. For the next few days, I went through the motions of life, all while Lisa and I began piecing together Jenna's hidden world. She helped me install tracking software on Jenna's phone and gave me tips on gathering evidence without raising suspicion. It felt surreal, like something out of a spy novel, but it was my reality now. One evening, while Jenna was in the shower, I unlocked her phone. My hands trembled as I scrolled through her messages, finding nothing incriminating at first. But then, there it was, a thread with George, disguised under a generic contact name. Their conversations were coded, filled with references to meetings and projects, but the underlying tone was unmistakable. It took everything in me not to smash the phone right there. Instead, I took screenshots, forwarding them to a private folder I'd created. Lisa was right, I needed a solid case before making my move. The final piece of the puzzle came a week later when Jenna announced she'd be going on a work retreat over the weekend. Her demeanor was casual, almost rehearsed, as she rattled off details about the supposed location and itinerary. But I knew better. Lisa had already tipped me off about George's plans for the same weekend. As Jenna packed her bags, I felt a mix of anger and determination bubbling inside me. She didn't suspect a thing, and I intended to keep it that way, at least for now. The weekend arrived, and Jenna left early Saturday morning, planting a kiss on my cheek before driving off. I watched her car disappear down the street, my jaw tightening. It was time to act. I called Lisa, and together, we finalized the plan. By the evening, I would confront them both, armed with the evidence I had meticulously gathered. It wouldn't be pretty, but it would be thorough. What Jenna didn't realize was that this wasn't just about confronting her infidelity, it was about reclaiming my life. Saturday evening arrived, and my heart pounded like a drum in my chest. Jenna's work retreat had been scheduled to start in the early afternoon, and by now, she was comfortably settled into her lie. Lisa had sent me the final confirmation an hour earlier, a screenshot from the tracking app, showing Jenna's phone location at a luxury hotel on the other side of town. George was there too, his truck had been spotted in the parking lot. I sat in my car outside the hotel, staring at its glowing facade. It was a sleek, modern building, the kind you'd expect for high-end conferences or romantic getaways. Tonight, it served as a stage for betrayal. I inhaled deeply, forcing myself to focus. This wasn't just about catching them in the act. This was about the reckoning. Before heading inside, I reviewed my evidence, screenshots of messages, photos of locations, and the undeniable tracker data. I had it all neatly compiled in a folder, ready to present. My mind swirled with questions: would she deny it? Would George try to spin some pathetic excuse? None of it mattered. The truth was irrefutable. The lobby was bustling with activity, couples checking in and staff bustling about. I approached the reception desk, doing my best to appear calm. "I'm here to meet my wife," I said, flashing a strained smile. "Jenna Kaminsky." She checked in earlier. The receptionist nodded and clicked away at her computer. "Ah, yes, Mrs. Kaminsky. She's in room 314. Would you like me to call up?" "No need," I said quickly, my voice tight. "I'll surprise her." The elevator ride felt eternal. My fingers itched to press the folder tighter against my chest, a shield against the storm I was about to unleash. When I reached the third floor, I found room 314 at the far end of the hall. The door was slightly ajar, and laughter filtered through the crack. Her laugh. His laugh. The sound hit me like a physical blow, but it also ignited a fire in my chest. I pushed the door open. Jenna was perched on the edge of the bed, George leaning toward her, their heads close as they laughed over something on his phone. The sight burned itself into my brain, her carefree expression, his smug grin, the way her hand rested lightly on his arm. My stomach turned. "Kurt." Jenna's voice was a mixture of shock and panic as she scrambled to her feet. George froze, his face going pale. "Well," I said, stepping fully into the room and closing the door behind me. "Don't stop on my account." "Kurt, this isn't," Jenna began, but I held up a hand. "Save it," I snapped. My voice was sharper than I'd intended, but the rage bubbling inside me couldn't be contained. "I'm not here for your lies. I'm here for the truth." George stood, his hands raised as though surrendering. "Hey, man, I can explain." "Explain?" I interrupted, laughing bitterly. "Oh, this should be good. Let me guess, it's not what it looks like." Jenna reached for me, but I stepped back, holding up the folder. "You don't need to explain anything, Jenna. I've got it all right here." I tossed the folder onto the bed, its contents spilling out, screenshots, photos, maps. Each piece of evidence a nail in the coffin of her deceit. Her eyes widened as she took in the damning proof, her face flushing with shame, or was it anger? George shifted uncomfortably, his gaze darting between us. Kurt, Jenna tried again, her voice trembling. I was going to tell you. I just needed. You needed what? I barked, cutting her off. More time to figure out how to spin this. More time to sneak around behind my back. Don't insult me. She shrank back, and for a moment, I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. Then George opened his mouth. Look, Kurt, I know this is bad. Bad? I whirled on him, my fists clenched. You've been sleeping with my wife, George. My wife. And you have the nerve to stand there and say it's bad? He raised his hands defensively. I didn't mean. Shut up, I snapped, my voice low and venomous. You don't get to talk. Not after this. The room fell silent, the tension so thick it was suffocating. Jenna stared at the floor, tears streaming down her face. George looked like he wanted to bolt but didn't dare move. I took a deep breath, forcing myself to remain composed. Here's how this is going to go, I said, my voice cold. Jenna, you're going to pack your things and leave the house. Effective immediately. George, don't bother showing up to work on Monday. You're fired. Jenna's head shot up. Kurt, you can't. I can, and I will, I said firmly. You've both made your choices. Now you'll live with the consequences. I turned to leave, but Jenna grabbed my arm. Please, Kurt. Don't do this. We can fix this. I'll do anything. I looked at her, really looked at her, and felt a pang of sadness for the life we'd built, now reduced to rubble. You should have thought of that before you threw it all away, I said quietly, pulling free from her grasp. As I walked out of the room, I felt a strange sense of clarity. The confrontation hadn't been easy, but it was necessary. And now, for the first time in years, I felt free. The drive home from the hotel was a blur. My hands gripped the steering wheel tightly, the cool night air rushing through the cracked window doing little to cool the fire in my chest. The confrontation was over, but its echoes reverberated through my mind. Every laugh they shared, every excuse Jenna tried to muster, every pathetic word from George replayed on a loop, like a broken record I couldn't turn off. When I finally pulled into the driveway, the house loomed in silence. Inside, Carrie was likely asleep, blissfully unaware of the storm brewing. For her sake, I had to keep things as normal as possible, at least for now. Jenna wouldn't dare show her face here tonight, not after the ultimatum I gave her. I'd made sure of that. I unlocked the door and stepped inside, the familiar creak of the floorboards beneath my feet grounding me. Dropping my keys on the counter, I poured myself a glass of water, leaning against the sink as I tried to piece together the next steps. It wasn't just about ending the marriage, it was about dismantling the life we built together and figuring out how to move forward without her. The faint sound of footsteps pulled me from my thoughts. Carrie appeared at the bottom of the stairs, rubbing her eyes. Dad? You're home late. Hey, sweetheart. I forced a smile, setting down the glass. Sorry, I had a long day. Where's Mom? The question made my stomach twist, but I kept my expression neutral. She's staying out tonight for work. Something came up. Carrie nodded sleepily, accepting the answer without question. Okay. Good night, Dad. Good night, kiddo. I kissed her forehead as she padded back upstairs. The next morning came too quickly. As the sunlight streamed through the windows, I felt the weight of the decision ahead. Jenna hadn't contacted me overnight, but I knew it was only a matter of time. Sure enough, around noon, my phone buzzed with her name lighting up the screen. I let it ring. Then again. And again. By the fifth call, I finally answered. What do you want, Jenna? Her voice was soft, almost pleading. Kurt, please. Let's talk. Just the two of us. There's nothing to talk about, I said flatly. You made your choice. Now live with it. Kurt, I'm sorry, she said, her voice cracking. It was a mistake, a terrible mistake. But I still love you. I love our family. I can fix this. Just give me a chance. Her words rang hollow. A mistake? I scoffed. You've been doing this for years, Jenna. You don't get to call it a mistake. It was a series of deliberate choices, and now you're facing the consequences. I'll do anything, she pleaded. Therapy, counseling, whatever it takes. Just don't throw away what we have. I hesitated, not because her words moved me, but because of the sheer audacity of her plea. After everything she'd done, she still believed she could salvage what was left. You already threw it away, Jenna. Don't pin this on me. Before she could respond, I hung up, my chest heaving. The anger and betrayal churned within me, but I refused to let her manipulate me into giving her a lifeline. It was time to take control. The next few days were a whirlwind of action. I contacted my lawyer, laying out everything I'd gathered, the evidence, the timeline, the confrontation. My lawyer was thorough and ruthless, assuring me that Jenna's infidelity would work heavily in my favor during the divorce proceedings. The house, custody of Carrie, financial assets, all of it was being secured under my name. Jenna, meanwhile, sent text after text, each one more desperate than the last. She begged, she apologized, she even tried to justify her actions, blaming the distance in our marriage and her own insecurities. I didn't respond. There was no justification for what she'd done. George wasn't faring much better. I'd made good on my promise to fire him, ensuring he was permanently blacklisted from any work associated with my business. Word traveled fast, and soon enough, his reputation was in tatters. Mutual friends began to reach out, their voices filled with shock and disappointment as they learned the truth. George, who had once been the golden boy of our social circle, was now a pariah. Lisa was a steady presence throughout it all, offering support and helping me navigate the chaos. She took on the difficult task of explaining the situation to Carrie in a way that shielded her from the worst details. When Carrie finally asked me directly about Jenna's absence, I told her the truth, at least part of it. Your mom and I are going through some things, I said gently. We're not going to be together anymore, but that doesn't change how much we love you. Carrie's eyes welled up with tears, but she nodded bravely. Okay, Dad. I just want us to be happy. Her words solidified my resolve. This wasn't just about me, it was about creating a stable, healthy environment for her. Jenna's betrayal had fractured our family, but it wouldn't destroy it. By the end of the week, Jenna finally showed up at the house. She stood on the porch, her face pale and drawn, clutching a box of her belongings. I opened the door but didn't invite her in. Kurt, she began, her voice shaking. Please, just hear me out. I crossed my arms, my expression unreadable. You've got 5 minutes. She stepped forward, tears streaming down her face as she begged for forgiveness. She spoke of regret, of wanting to make amends, of still believing in the love we once shared. But as she poured out her heart, all I could feel was emptiness. The woman standing before me wasn't the Jenna I thought I knew. She was a stranger. When she finished, I nodded. Thank you for saying your piece. But it doesn't change anything. Kurt, please. No, I said firmly. You need to leave. This isn't your home anymore. Her shoulders slumped, and for a moment, she looked like she might collapse. But she turned and walked away, the box clutched tightly to her chest. As I watched her go, I felt a strange mix of relief and sadness. It was the end of an era, but also the beginning of something new. As I closed the door, the weight on my shoulders lifted slightly. The fallout had been devastating, but I was still standing. And for Carrie's sake, I would keep moving forward. Weeks turned into months, and life gradually found its rhythm again. The house felt emptier without Jenna, but it was a peaceful emptiness, free of tension, deceit, and the constant second-guessing that had plagued me for years. Carrie and I carved out a new normal, finding comfort in our routines. She threw herself into her art, and I found solace in rebuilding my life, one step at a time. The divorce proceedings were swift and decisive. Jenna's infidelity, backed by undeniable evidence, left her with little leverage. The house was mine, Carrie remained in my custody, and Jenna was left to rebuild her life on her own. Occasionally, I would catch snippets of gossip about her and George, how their fling had fizzled out shortly after I exposed their betrayal. George had fled town, his reputation ruined, while Jenna seemed to drift aimlessly, her once confident demeanor replaced with something hollow. For a while, that felt like closure. The slate was clean, the future wide open. And then came the letter. It arrived on a crisp October morning, buried under the usual pile of bills and junk mail. The envelope was plain, with no return address, but the handwriting on the front was familiar, Lisa's. Curious, I tore it open and unfolded the single sheet of paper inside. The words were short, almost clinical, but they hit me like a freight train. Dear Kurt. There's something you need to know. It wasn't Jenna who first betrayed you, it was me. I knew about her affair with George from the beginning, but I didn't come clean out of loyalty. To her, yes, but also to protect myself. I blinked, rereading the lines, struggling to process what I was seeing. George wasn't her first affair. Jenna confided in me years ago about another man, one who came before George. She was terrified you would find out. I promised to keep her secret, but when I saw how much it was hurting you, I couldn't stay silent anymore. So I framed George. My breath caught. Framed? The room seemed to tilt around me as I continued reading. Jenna was seeing someone else entirely during those trips, but I knew George's flirtatious nature would make him an easy scapegoat. He wasn't innocent, he crossed lines, but their relationship was never physical. I gave you the idea to track Jenna's phone and arranged for you to find them together that night at the hotel. Everything else was staged. I thought it would force her to come clean and push you toward the truth. Instead, it ended everything. The paper trembled in my hands as I read the final lines. I don't expect you to forgive me, but I needed you to know the full story. I thought I was protecting you, but maybe I was just protecting myself. I'm sorry. Lisa. For a long moment, I stood frozen, the letter dangling from my fingers. The anger that surged through me wasn't the raw, blinding rage I had felt with Jenna, it was cold, calculated. Lisa, the person I thought had been my ally, had manipulated me just as much as Jenna had. Worse, she had used my pain to play out her twisted sense of justice. I sat down at the kitchen table, staring out the window as the pieces clicked into place. Lisa's involvement, her eagerness to help, her insistence on targeting George, all of it had been a carefully crafted narrative. And I had bought it. But then another thought crept in, one that made my blood run cold. If Jenna's real affair hadn't been with George, then who had it been with? And why hadn't she told me the truth, even after everything fell apart? I reached for my phone and dialed Lisa's number, my fingers trembling. It rang twice before she answered. Kurt. Her voice was cautious, wary. I got your letter, I said, my voice tight. You owe me an explanation. There was a long pause. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. I thought I was doing the right thing. Jenna was destroying you, and you deserved better. That's not an explanation, Lisa. That's an excuse. Who was it? Who was she really seeing? Silence. Then, with a shaky breath, she said the name. It was Adam. The name hit me like a physical blow. Adam Hawkins. My business partner. My confidant. The man who had helped me build my company from the ground up. He had been a fixture in our lives, someone I trusted implicitly. The thought of him and Jenna together made my stomach churn. "Why didn't you tell me?" I demanded. "Why not just tell me the truth?" "Because I didn't know how deep it went," she admitted. "I only found out recently. By then, it was too late. I thought if I shifted the blame to George, it would end things cleanly. I never expected you to go after her like that." Her voice cracked. "I'm sorry, Kurt. I really am." I hung up without responding, my mind racing. If what Lisa said was true, then Adam had been lying to me for years. Worse, he had used my trust as a shield for his betrayal. And while Jenna and George had borne the brunt of my anger, Adam had walked away unscathed. Not anymore. I spent the next few days gathering evidence, poring over financial records and emails. Slowly but surely, the picture became clear. Adam had not only been sleeping with my wife, he had been siphoning money from the company as well, using bogus expenses and shell accounts to hide his theft. When I confronted him in his office, the look on his face was priceless. "Kurt," he began, his voice steady but his eyes betraying his panic. "What's this about?" I dropped the stack of evidence on his desk. "You tell me." His face turned pale as he sifted through the documents, the realization dawning on him. "Kurt, I can explain." "No," I said coldly. "You can pack your things and get out. The board's already been informed. And if you so much as try to fight this, I'll make sure Jenna's part in all of this becomes public knowledge. How do you think your wife will feel about that?" Adam's shoulders slumped, the fight draining out of him. He nodded, his hands trembling as he began gathering his belongings. As I walked out of his office, I felt an odd sense of closure. The past few months had been a whirlwind of betrayal and heartbreak, but now, for the first time, I felt truly free. The wreckage of my old life lay behind me, and in its place was the promise of a fresh start. As I climbed into my car, my phone buzzed with a message from Lisa. "I hope you can forgive me someday. You deserve happiness, Kurt. Don't let any of this take that from you." I didn't reply. Instead, I drove home to Carrie, ready to start the life we both deserved. This wasn't just the end of a marriage, it was the beginning of something new. And this time, I would build it on a foundation that no one could shake.